And we're live at Expert35. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, and as promised, experts from 35 different industries talking about the challenges, the hardships, and the opportunities. And today we've got nobody other but Melanie Johnston, who has more initials than I can even count behind her name. MA, SLP, I mean, you've got it all. Talking about safely reopening schools, kids in public, and all the things that are happening to our mental health on and offline. Melanie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Before we get started, guys, if you want to join the conversation, text Expert35 to get on the show, to learn about when we're on, to get notifications. And if you want to follow Melanie and understand more about how she deals with the special needs kids and some of the incredible research she's done in the past, she is Expert60. So we have had definitely more than 35 experts on the show. She's Expert60. Text Expert60 to 855-640-3500. Melanie, thank you so much for being on the show. Before we get started, I want to just tell your story a little bit. Like how did you get into serving the way you do?
Well, I started off as a speech pathologist and was in graduate school and getting my master's with concentration in special education and educational psychology. Went into private practice, worked in public schools and private schools, and I've had the opportunity to work with individuals from birth all the way through adulthood, but the commonality is everyone that I've gotten to serve and work with had some form of a developmental disability. So um, for the last 35 years, that's where my dedication to the field has been, whether it was in private practice or as a public school practitioner and public school special education supervisor.
And so important right now because I mean, I feel like we are all now kind of hitting this wall. We're all kind of these special, we all have special needs at some point in some aspect. And as things are, become this new transition, right? You deal a lot with children now, even though you've dealt with adults as well. One of the most important questions that we were talking offline is how can we prepare children now that they're going back into public and maybe going back to school?
Well, I think for me, the most important thing is when we recognize what is being expected in public for individuals to do, we have to stop politicizing whether we're going to wear a mask and wash our hands. Do we
Mhm.
agree or not agree? Because children are going to be judged by whether they are following rules.
Right.
So we need to be thoughtful about preparing them. This is how you wear a mask. This is how you wash your hands. And I'm going to say it's not just children, it's individuals that have a disability all the way through their lifespan because they're going to be going other places as well, and they need to feel very confident that, oh yeah, I'm learning how to do this, everybody's going to do this, it's okay, so that
Mhm.
they're confident, that they feel like they've done the right thing. Because when children and individuals with disability of all kinds, when they go into an arena where someone is critical or telling them they've done something wrong, they kind of panic. And that doesn't matter if you're a child with or without a disability or an adult. I mean, your first reaction is, oh my gosh, what have I done wrong? So that preparation prior is huge. And then to be able to thoughtfully give them support on how to fix the part that's wrong that may not be exactly right. So, teaching them by watching videos on how to wash your hands, watching videos on using hand gel, watching videos on how to wear a mask, what's the right way and what's the wrong way.
Right.
A simple reminder is like, oh yeah, I already learned that.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, I can do that. And that's
Well,
huge.
and just like anything, sometimes it takes repetition and making it part of that structure. I think is important. Greg's got a quick question. He says, with recent stories of school quarantine, how do you decide if kids are better off in school or distance learning?
I think it's an excellent question. And it really kind of goes to the individual in some ways. Um, First of all, every family is different, every need is different, and some of our families and some of our children and adults are much more immunocompromised than others. And so you would definitely want to take a different view or perspective of how you want your family member, your child to go back into school. But the other thing is, every child has a learning style, whether they are special needs or not. And some children learn just fine from distance. You give them the information, they fill out what you've given them, they turn it back in, they're great. And we have other learners who are multisensory learners. They need to have that interaction with the teacher, they need hands-on materials, they need to be able to share that information. They are auditory learners, they want to hear a lot. So when you have a learner that's a multisensory learner, that distance learning is the hardest thing for them to do because they're not getting enough of that information. So you really kind of have to know the individual child or
Right.
adult who's not learning to be able to say, my kid can't learn on a computer.
Right.
Um, I have lots of grandchildren, and I have one in particular who's a very gifted child, but she is having the most difficulty learning online because she's a multisensory learner. She has a sister who's an introvert who loves learning online. You know, they say that pandemic is like the best thing an introvert ever got because now they have permission to stay home and don't talk to anybody. But
Right.
yeah, so it's personality difference, but it's learning style. So we
Right.
can't count learning style. And to me, that's a huge piece of who needs to be back in the classroom.
Well, and I was a very auditory learner, right? I'm dyslexic. And so for me, it was not so much what the teacher was saying, it was what like the group was saying in conversations.
Exactly.
And I would have never made it to the call.
And listening to why people did what they did. And
Mhm.
yeah, take all of that in made how you put all of the pieces together.
Yeah, like a regular day in college for me was like I was walking to school to class and like, "Are you ready for the exam?" I was like, "What exam?" And I was like, I mean, I had to. I would show up at 2 exams not knowing there was an exam, and but if I was communicating, if I was involved with the community, I would know, and that's how my schedule was kept by having that social interaction. So I definitely know I couldn't have made it through this super structured because I see the classroom and you're just in that class looking at the teacher, but you're not having those little, one-on-one conversations on the side.
Right. And I think there's one other piece to answer his question, and that was if you know what your school is planning to do you feel comfortable with the steps they're taking? Do you feel like they've done what needs to be done to keep your child physically safe? I think that's a judgment call every family has to make.
And Jana has got a great question. What tips for homeschooling while working full time? And I think this is something we've been talking about offline too.
Okay, working full time from home. I'm gonna hope that that's the case for you. If you're having to help your kiddos and you're working full time from home, I'm gonna say the best thing you can do is have a schedule and have a specified place for learning. So my place to work is in my office. If you have an office space, and if you don't, everybody should have a table, a chair, a space where that is where you do your work. And if you can put yourself on a schedule and say, okay, for every hour, I'm going to get my kids started 5 minutes at a time. So I'm going to go to child number one, take 5 minutes, get them set up, go to child number two, take 5 minutes, get them set up, and then go do 50 minutes of my work. And I would set timers. I would say, okay, when this timer goes off, child number one, when you hear the
Yeah.
timer, let me see what you've gotten done. Just walk
You
over
know,
and show me. I'll give you the thumbs up. You can head back and finish. And so at
I
the beginning,
bet
you do that. Yeah.
I bet there's an app or I bet there's a sound that sounds like the bell for schools because that's what those are, right? I mean, the school is so structured. Like we forget, we drop them off at school, but the school literally has like 30-minute, 45 one. I mean, there's bells. You go to a different teacher. Every teacher has a lesson plan. So I guess you're kind of building that within.
Super important. Here's another super important tip too. And I think Jenna, you may be doing this, I don't know, but so once you've gotten them started and they come to you, and because the way school assignments are set up, they don't take an hour. They get 10 minutes to get them
Mhm.
started. They do 15 minutes to actually do paperwork. Then they do 5 minutes of follow up. And then they give them time for those who didn't quite get done yet. And they get to walk around. They get to go to the bathroom. I mean, they have hour blocks of school, but they don't teach for an hour. And I
Right.
think that's super important. You've got to give kids movement time. You've got to give them processing time. It's not just about taking in information and doing one thing after another. Take it in, process it, use it a little bit, walk around, come back and do the next thing. That's how you kind of put it all together. It's that integration piece. So factor that into the way you get your kids set up. When the timer goes off, you get to go to the bathroom, you get to get a drink, you get to go read a book, you get to go jump on the
Hmm.
trampoline, set those timers so that they can gauge their day as well. To me, that's one of the hardest things of working at home, even if you don't have children at school. Working at home is trying to judge how much time you've done anything. How long
Right.
have I been here? What did I get done? So I think that that's another thing you can look at.
So interesting. And that's important, right? Like the day goes flying by and you can lose track of time too. And especially if we're working, like sometimes I'm doing something and I turn back and it's like, oh, it's been 2 hours, but then you didn't have that structure with a child either, right? Greg's got
Right.
another great question. How distressing will it be for students to return to school they no longer recognize, I guess, with the masks and the distancing?
Okay, well, I think that's kind of a multi-layer answer for that. So the first thing is if if I'm distressed and I'm anxious about my kids may have a hard time getting back, they're going to pick up on my anxiety and they're going to think there's something wrong. So the first thing we have to do is I don't ever want to call this a new normal. I just want to call it a pause button on life. Things will be changing. Change is inevitable and this is going to change too. So if we don't politicize things looking different, if we can just say, when you go back to school, it's going to be a little different. It's going to be weird, but it's going to be okay. The first thing is if we're comfortable, they'll be comfortable. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is to prepare them for it, to let them know it's going to be different. And the third thing is to remember every year when school starts, things are different. Their teacher is different. The way the room is set up is different. The children in the classroom are different. And so there is that unrecognized piece to school starting back always. So it's just adding one more new thing to it. And I think it's important to remember that it takes children up to the first 6 weeks of school to get used to the routine and to become comfortable with what's
Hmm.
going on in the classroom. So we don't want to make them feel like they have to hurry up and get okay with it. We need to feel okay with saying, it's going to take a little while to get used to it. It's if you forget to put your mask on right or you didn't wash your hands, you're not going to get in trouble. You're learning. This is all about learning the culture and the routine of your class. And it's
Right.
okay. It's okay.
No, and I think, offline we were talking about, it's a new way of being, like, not shaming them. It's like how to train them again. And I love the pause button too. Is we're all, it doesn't matter. I know you deal with, some special needs, but we all have these special needs and we all have anxiety. And I think our level of anxiety is climbing. So the what advice do you have in terms of, you know, addressing that or being able to lower that anxiety?
Yeah, I think it's really important to try to keep yourself as mentally centered as possible and emotionally centered as possible. Um,
Hmm.
you know, we have to do things to de-stress. And staying in our house all the time is just crazy stressful. And then, well, where can I go where we're going to be safe? I mean, all of those things play into our minds. We have to do things that help us reduce our stress. One of the things about people who work out is it's predictable end, right?
Hmm.
So you reduce your stress because when I get done, I'm going to be hot and sweaty and I'm going to feel like this, and I know what's coming, and it's okay. So doing things that have a predictable end are important. And you and I talked about, what we've done right now is it's like playing a video game
Hmm.
and paused your video game and you left, but everybody else kept playing. And you came back and you didn't know where you were in the game. Well, the biggest difference is nobody knows where we are in the game. And we're all a little bit off center trying to figure out how do we get back in this game. And so you go to things that are predictable. You create a schedule for yourself, you create structure for yourself and for your family so that it's like, okay, wait, if I do this the same way every day,
Right.
I feel better about it. My anxiety is going to go down. So it's really important for us, but it's super important for children. Um, a regular bedtime. You get up at the same time every day. I don't care when you start your work schedule, your school
Hmm.
schedule, you maintain a schedule for this is when you go to bed, this is when you get up, this
Right.
is when we go to work, this is when we take our breaks, this is when we have lunch, this is when we're going to go outside, and putting in things during the day like go jump on the trampoline for a while. This is we're going to do it this time of day every day. You get a choice
Hmm.
between trampoline or this other thing. You know,
Nice.
yeah, parents, uh, uh, when my kids were little, we didn't worry too much about screen time, but now parents used to control screen time. Now you don't get to think about it that way because you got your kids on a screen learning. So what do we do with other screen time, right? So you think about how can we put that in? I have to tell you, I love, love, love what you can do on YouTube with things like Go Noodle and Dance Dance and
Yes.
tell my kids, go do 20 minutes. I mean, when I would have my grandchildren with me and we were working, we would do stuff and say, okay, what are we going to do on YouTube? What kind of exercise do y'all want to do? And
Hmm.
they loved it all the way up to my junior high age. So that kind of stuff becomes really important and it needs to be predictably scheduled. I know when it's coming. I know how long it lasts. I know
Right.
the expectation. That decreases your anxiety. And again, it's whether you're a child or an adult with or without a disability, predictability helps us to reduce anxiety.
Well, and this just takes us right into Jennifer's questions. What's a good reward system for children? And before we jump, I love to hear your answer. Is another really good tip when I teach gamification is I tell people don't do the when you're in a couple, you're like, hey, what do you want to do for dinner? Oh, I don't care, whatever you want, honey. Like that's not structured.
Right.
When you're talking to a child or when you're talking to anybody, even your partner, I use the idea of a decision tree. Always give them two or three options, but three options that you can actually provide. Don't say, what do you want to do? Say, hey, do you want to jump, like you said, jump on the trampoline? Do you want to do Go Noodle? Or do you want to make cookies? Because those are
Hmm.
three. Hopefully you can make cookies. Like don't offer make cookies if you don't have your cookie dough in the fridge, right? Like,
Exactly. Exactly.
so
And
that decision tree is strong.
that's a really good lead in to answer Jennifer's question. It's really important to know your children. And so I could say, oh, M&Ms are a great reward system. Every time you do something, I'm going to give you an M&M.
Hmm.
Well, my other kid might like Nutter Butters, or you never know what children want. I have some children who just want me to give them minutes on screen time with a specific game. You have to really know your child. You have to know what's important for them. And the best advice I can give you is sit back and reflect and say, what is something that is a necessity that I would never take away that should have to be earned? And what is a privilege? A privilege is a great thing for a reward. It is a privilege to watch certain television programs. It is a privilege to play certain games. It is a privilege to have special foods. It is a privilege to go and do certain things. And so to be able to do it for your child that way makes a huge difference. So if you say, I need for you to have this finished. And when your timer goes off, come and show it to me. And your reward will be a choice of some preferred activities or preferred
Hmm.
things. But you can do it on a timer. You can do it at the end of the day. Some children do really well with what we call token boards, check marks, stars, that kind of thing. Other kids don't need that. It would be wonderful for me to say everybody's going to respond the same way. But
Right.
I know with my children, my own children growing up, we always had different kinds of reward systems, but my kids weren't the same. And I actually have identical twins, and their rewards were not the same. I had one that wanted a social reward, and I had one that wanted something where she could be by herself.
Hmm.
So, know your child and structure the reward for what is appropriate to them. And then when they say, well, you let so and so do this or do that, my response has always been, I will do for you what you need, I promise. I'll
Right.
never give you something that you don't need or that you don't want. And if
That's
you keep that in mind, it really is helpful.
That's beautiful. I'm going to put you on the spot because I know we didn't talk about this offline, but you have a quote that's really powerful on your website that we've talked about before about like if the child cannot learn.
If a child can't learn in the way that we teach, we
Hmm.
must teach in the way that a child can learn. And that was a quote from Dr. Ivar Lobos. And he was one of the first behavior psychologists to ever use behavior and applied behavior analysis for children with autism. And, to me, we can't do things the same way all the time. We are not exactly the same, and everybody learns different, just like we were talking about learning styles and the
Mhm.
same reinforcement. So if what I've done didn't change or make a positive difference, just take a step back and say, okay, that didn't work. What's another way to do it?
And I mean, that's exactly what we're talking about. So I love that quote, and it's so important. Greg's got another great question: is, in your opinion, how well are schools, districts doing in making decisions and communicating with students' families?
I mean, it's just my opinion, but I think it's district to district, and they
Hmm.
have a huge job. Small districts versus large district. I mean, you can go anywhere from a district with 800 students to one with 60,000 students,
Hmm.
and the needs are so varied. Um, I would not want to be a superintendent of schools right now because they are having to get information from the education agency, TEA. They're getting it from the federal school district, the federal schools
Right.
czar. They're also having to listen to their school boards and then families. And everybody has a valid position to come into this game with. So I do think that districts providing options to families has been the most reasonable approach that I've heard. And primarily because there are a lot of people who there is no option to stay home. And those moms and dads have to go to work.
Right.
And they do not want to leave their children unattended. They're having a lot of difficulty finding someone who will do childcare for them because of COVID.
Hmm.
Um, Not all daycares are open, even though they're considered essential. And finding someone who will let their school age children come into their home, difficult. And so those families really don't have a choice except to send their kids back if possible. And so I think giving informed choice to families is the most reasonable thing. And I don't know of a district that hasn't taken that approach. So
Right.
from that respect, I think they're doing a good job communicating with their families. Again, every district is different. Some
Well,
of
and
them,
we got to talk about,
yeah.
the biggest challenge I see is the at-risk population, not just because they need to go to school for food, right? Because
Mhm.
these kids aren't getting enough food. I mean, like, we forget that. Like, the lines at the food bank sometimes are ridiculous, right? And that's
Right.
because schools are such a network of feeding children. But then also we got
Absolutely.
to talk about the kids that are abused at home, right?
Right.
Like, schools
Well,
can be a haven for them.
and we also have special needs children, and I think this is
Mm.
really important. The Texas Education Agency came out and said children with special needs have to be educated during this time, just like anybody else.
Mhm.
Well, I will tell you, the majority of children with special needs require a small staff to student ratio, but they also require a whole lot of one-on-one and face to face and special materials and all kinds of things that have been adapted, and that's really hard to do from a
Mhm.
distance. If any group needed to go back, I would say the majority are those who may be the most immunocompromised,
Mhm.
but definitely have the most challenge in when it comes to learning. And so, like, if child can't learn in the way you teach in the way they learn. It's
Right.
especially important for those children. So, it's a huge, huge problem and issue. And I do know some schools who the first groups back are going to be their special needs students for that very reason.
Right. And Jennifer's question is kind of right in line with that. Like, hey, if the child can't go into a classroom, what are alternatives? And I mean, I guess even BRITE Success, you guys do some one-on-one learning. Are you guys still meeting children face to face? Oh, and you were talking about when you first meet, like what you do, right?
Oh,
With
yeah.
math.
Okay, so one of the things we've done is, when we meet someone and they have some concerns, who is that? Is that really Miss Melanie back there under that
Mm.
mask? Put the face shield on, the splash shield with our mask, and then I'll just take my mask off and say, "Hi, this is me," and then I'll put my mask back on. It's important for them to be able to see your whole face, and so that can be done in a classroom as well. So, like with new teachers and things, the question that had been before from Greg about helping kids feel more confident going into a classroom, a teacher could do the same thing, and then we can offer that same shield to different children if they wanted to be able to show their friends that it was them. That can decrease anxiety and that can definitely help. But if you can't get a child with special needs into the classroom, a good alternative is to be able to have real strict dialogue with the teacher and to obtain materials and direction on how to use those materials in your home. There are also a lot of different therapy groups that are offering in-clinic therapy as well as distance therapy, and we actually in our clinic we're doing both. It depends on the individual and the needs of the family. And so if you can get that kind of support as well, basically we're trying to teach parents to be facilitators of therapy and education. And it's not always easy. And trying to teach that to someone from a distance takes a lot of finesse, but it can be done. So if you can't get a child into the classroom, be sure you have the materials that you need. If you need alternative materials, request them. Um, I would go so far as to say, in some cases, you may just have to demand, you have to give me something to do with this child. This is not working. And
Right.
then ask for specific instruction. How am I supposed to use this? Can you watch me do this one on one? I know you're teaching a bunch of other people, but I need you one on one with me, watching me with this particular child to ensure that I'm giving them what they need because I'm not a teacher. That's not what I do. So that's very fair.
Super important. Great advice. I think that's actually really timely. My favorite part of the show is three things to do now. So, with that, go, Melanie. Three things.
All right. Structure your environment. Get a schedule. Put it on the calendar and don't deviate. This is who, so number one, structure. Number two, a visual schedule calendar that everybody follows. And number three, stick to it. That will decrease anxiety, increase productivity. And when life is predictable, the new normal makes a little bit more sense. I know what I'm doing every day. It's on the calendar. I see it. We didn't deviate from it. So even if I don't like it, I knew what to expect and it happened. That's huge.
Incredible advice. Love the conversation. Love the idea of like showing the kid, like not politicizing it, walking them through the scenarios and not shaming them. Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No shame. If they aren't doing it, we assume they don't know. Reteach it. I'm
Mhm.
learning to wash my hands. I'm learning to wear a mask. I'm learning to social distance. I and if I didn't do it, I just didn't remember. Please show me again. And it
Right.
doesn't matter what age. Teach, teach, reteach.
Right. And exactly. It doesn't matter age. I mean, I'm doing it with my team, right? We're figuring out ways to work together. We're figuring out how to like communicate, but also sometimes, I mean, we need that look, that human touch, and that distance is just too much, right? 120 days without a hug is way too long,
Right.
right? And
It,
so, I hope that one, people can really get past this to where we can be safe and reopen. And the longer this happens, the more time we have to understand how Corona works. But
mhm.
also, it's really taking a toll mentally, physically, and emotionally.
And
So,
so really we just need to learn that there's still ways to be social and that we are social beings and we need to work really hard at maintaining a good social healthy relationship and however that is. Yeah, and I need to hug again too, Jennifer. I'm with you on that. And we teach how to hug each other. I mean, one of the things that I say is my parents are in their 90s and I was not allowed to see them. And so we hugged through the window. My parents were on one side, we get on the other side, and you hug. This
mhm.
is my hug to you because I do need a hug. I need to feel that. They need to feel that. We don't want to be socially distanced. We need that contact. So we want to keep moving forward that way.
So great having you on the show. I want to have you back. This was
Thanks
so
for having
like, I
me
mean, so much info, so little time, but
today.
just, I mean, I think parents need to hear it. We need to hear it, just to be aware of like, you're totally right. The structure. I think one of my favorite quotes, you know him, Christian. He posted right as COVID started, is like, my house is like Vegas. There's a drink in my hand. We don't know what time it is, and it's true. At first, it was fun that there was no structure. But
Right.
now it's like, no, we may even need to over throttle the structure. I love the bell idea, and I'm going to
Mhm.
try to find a bell that sounds just like the school bells, and we'll
Yeah.
put it on the chat. We're going to
Yeah.
let you go on the chat and answer all the questions and put those notes in there,
Okay.
because there's just so much need for what you do. And thank you so much for helping the population that you serve. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, guys. Thank you, Valerie. We'll see you soon.
Okay.
All right. That was Melanie Johnston. Man, see us next week. We're going to be talking about things you can do to keep your customers top of awareness. Also, we're going to talk about financial advising, like what you should do to store, especially during these uncertain times. And if you're starting a business, what you can do. So thank you so much for joining in, guys. We're going to send you guys off with a couple of videos and a couple little pictures from BRITE Success. Thank you, guys. We'll see you guys next week.
We educate during difficult times. We collaborate at Expert35. This is for a better tomorrow and a better today. Let's come together, and together we will find a way. You got questions, we got solutions.